Story 1. The value of property, including whole houses, apartments, and companies that were worth hundreds of thousands, dropped to whatever people could get for them so they could take the money and leave the country. Older people never surpassed the shock of having to sell something they worked their whole life to pay for. Story 2. Took out cash and hid it carefully, taking only very small amounts with me at all times because bank accounts were frozen, and bought items to trade with. Story 3. I have not personally experienced this, but I have read about the importance of backing up digital records, safeguarding identification documents, and maintaining a basic emergency cash reserve in a stable foreign currency. One thing I had not considered until recently is ensuring you have multiple ways to access your money or information, such as cloud backups, physical copies, and at least one trusted contact outside your country. That kind of preparation makes a significant difference when circumstances change suddenly. Story 4. Former Yugoslav checking in. I wish my family had left much sooner. Of course, I was very young and had no control over this. Story 5. Not me, but good advice. Save important documents like passports, identification, and school records, and keep copies online or on a USB stick. Learn another language to help if you need to move to another country. Keep some cash in a safe place, especially in a strong foreign currency. Be more careful about sharing opinions, even with friends. Pay more attention to early warning signs, like unfair elections or new strict laws. Make a backup plan for where to go and what to do if things get bad. Story 6. I can only, so far, answer for my grandfather. He was a public prosecutor in Weimar Germany who went after Nazis for their crimes. When they took power, he continued prosecuting them until they had enough of him and came for him. He prepared by having what today we would call an emergency kit. Not some self-indulgent fantasy, but an actual kit that would get him to safety in an emergency. Money, passport, change of clothes, toothbrush, and a border crossing he had arranged beforehand and knew he could pass. I am alive today in part because of that plan. But there is another factor. Because of his public stand, he had the secret admiration of many neighbors who were otherwise silently acquiescent in the rise of German fascism. They called him at work to warn that the secret police were watching his house and had troops ready to arrest him the moment he came home. Don't come home, they urged. So he listened. He grabbed his things, headed out, and executed his escape plan. Thus I am also alive today in part because of those timid neighbors who knew what was right even though they feared to stand up openly. To this day, I still wonder. All those many who secretly knew right from wrong, what if they had stood together in the early days when it was still possible to stop the Nazis? Don't get me wrong. I appreciate that they saved my grandfather's life. But I still wonder. So I guess the summary is, on my grandfather's behalf, what I wish had happened beforehand is that more people had stood openly against what was happening, overcome their fear, stopped making excuses about not getting involved, and acted. Like you can act now before it is too late. Story 7. I wish I had left when I had the opportunity. I had relatives abroad who could have helped me and all the necessary documentation. The countries had not yet closed their doors to Venezuelans. However, I was too naive and did not want to be just a refugee. I thought the chaos would simply flush out the government and that we could start from zero, but all it did was empower bad people. Now, I am kind of trapped here while most of my family is in other countries. Story 8. I spent my early childhood in a country that went through massive political upheaval. What I noticed was that opportunists took full advantage. As systems like law and policing become unstable, people take every advantage they can. For example, crime syndicates formed where criminals had inside people within stores to inform on new purchases and delivery addresses. The criminals could break in and take brand new equipment, furniture, electronics, and more. Police didn't show up, there were no consequences, and insurance became pointless as there was more crime than they could cover. Upgrade your security systems and create a neighborhood watch system to keep an eye on things. The value of the currency crashed, so change your savings into a more stable currency. You can always change it back if the worst doesn't happen. If you can get out of the city, this doesn't mean that a rural environment will be completely safe, just safer. Property prices will very likely drop, and unemployment will increase because of the changes. Every country is different and has its own specific challenges during chaos. People might not want to hear doom and gloom, but political stability is very fragile. You only truly appreciate how valuable it is once it is gone. For me personally, I wish I had been old enough to understand that the bad actions of my fellow countrymen were not my fault. Keep yourself informed about what is going on, but don't watch the news all the time. If at all possible, get out of the country. Immigration is not as easy as much of the United States media makes it out to be. Have plans B, C, and D. For those thinking that nothing much will change for you, enjoy living in the bubble, but it is not going to last. I wish you the best, and I'm sorry this is happening. Story 9. My grandfather regrets not having sold his home and other assets before it was too late. In 1980, during the height of Argentina's military dictatorship, government officials seized his home in Buenos Aires. Without warning or explanation, a process server, flanked by 2 Porteño policemen, served eviction notices for the entire neighborhood. The military government expropriated private and commercial properties for national security or economic restructuring motives. Those officers were not there to enforce the law, they came to enforce silence. The Porteño police functioned as the regime's death squad. Everyone knew the rule: complain and you disappear. During Argentina's dirty war, some 30,000 civilians were taken by police and never returned home. Government repression worsened in response to economic downturns. Not long after, his neighborhood was bulldozed to make way for a Coca-Cola bottling plant. He blamed himself for not selling years earlier. In 1975, President Isabel Perón mobilized the army to suppress student demonstrators. Her show of force backfired and frightened foreign investors. Then, in 1976, Perón's closest ally, General Jorge Rafael Videla, deposed her in a United States-backed military coup. Growing uncertainty sent the economy into a tailspin. My grandfather's opportunity to sell had slammed shut. The nation, staggering to make sense of the political chaos, was unprepared for the 300% hyperinflation surge that hit like a tsunami. Even the elite were gripped by fear and uncertainty, and times only grew worse. Annual inflation rates, estimated inflation rate according to Argentine General Confederation of Labor Study, 1985, 1976, approximately 444%, 1977, approximately 175%, 1978, approximately 175%, 1979, approximately 139%, 1980, approximately 100%, 1981, approximately 131%, 1982, approximately 209%, 1983, approximately 343%. He endured those difficult years, but it did not matter, he still lost everything. It is always the poorest who pay the highest price in life. But as he sees it, he is blessed that neither of his sons were taken and disappeared during Argentina's dirty war. He is grateful to God for that. Story 10. The misconception is that democracy collapses in one event. The most painful part is knowing it was already being dismantled years before and realizing only a few people understand how democracy works. Story 11. As a Californian, I have a solid evacuation plan for fires. What would I need to prepare that is different? I have my documents ready in a box, my dog's vaccination records, a terabyte of files, cash, and an emergency box with hygiene items, a hand crank radio, water, protein bars, and more. I assume I need a solid exit plan beyond just leaving the house, such as researching how to enter Canada or Mexico with my dogs and understanding the legal process. Is there something I am forgetting? Story 12. I left as soon as possible when I only had suspicions about what was coming. Sadly, I was right. Fortunately, I am far away, safe, and I have all my needs covered. Story 13. My grandmother was a teenager when she came to England in the 1930s from Germany. The family had a business in Germany and had expanded to England, so they were able to come, but they only brought what they could carry. My parents still have some of these items, such as parts of kitchen cutlery sets. This reminds me of driving around Nuremberg as a child while my father was looking for her house but could not find it. Story 14. I have not experienced it, so I am summarizing some of what I read in this discussion and expanding on it based on my analysis of history. 1. Economic instability leads to downturns. The downturns lead to political instability due to promises that do not restore economic stability and, in the worst cases, lead to outright institutional failures. Large-scale institutional failures such as the collapse of policing, insurance, banking, hospitals, and welfare safety nets result in physiological and safety needs being unmet for large groups and the collapse of the entire system. Once institutions fail overall, large-scale trust in the nation collapses, and people revert to fending for themselves as individuals or militias. In such cases, the largest militias usually maintain authority over the land they control. They tend to operate as authoritarians because they use fear to maintain order rather than trust, as institutions do. At that point, it becomes difficult to rebuild institutions, as seen in many nations where the United States has experienced collapse in recent history. Now that we recognize the pattern of collapse, here is the advice. Recognize when large-scale institutional failures are occurring. This is evident when overt corruption becomes rampant in the lower levels of institutions. For example, police officers taking bribes or bank tellers skimming money from banks. At that point, sell your house and move to a safer location before there is a large influx of others looking to relocate. Ideally, do this before the currency collapses. If you cannot get out early, prepare the following items: essential documents, including both physical and digital copies, essentials for living, such as extra clothing and hygiene products, and enough cash or valuables to barter with so you can flee to safety. Story 15. Not from one of those countries for now, but I imagine in many of those countries, the leader in question who dismantled democracy was probably saying something about wanting to use the military on the political group or party he does not like and then followed through. Totally unrelated, but here was former President Trump in mid-October 2024. I think the bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people. Radical left lunatics. Trump said to Fox News' Maria Bartiromo in an interview on Sunday Morning Futures. I think it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by the National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military, because they cannot let that happen, he added. Story 16. I wish I had trusted my intuition earlier. There were signs. Media slowly getting censored, protests turning violent, politicians rewriting rules. I kept thinking it would not get that bad. I wish I had saved money outside the country, kept a valid passport, and maybe even had an escape plan. Story 17. Migrate to a better country with all my family before the collapse. That is what I wish I had done, not what I did. Story 18. In 1999, General Pervez Musharraf led a bloodless coup in Pakistan, ousting Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif and imposing military rule by suspending the constitution. As an ordinary citizen, I wish I had stayed calm, secured essentials, stayed informed, and hoped for a peaceful return to democracy. Story 19. When there is a risky event or warnings issued, go on an affordable vacation or visit relatives elsewhere for about a month. That saved many of my friends from Russia's war. Story 20. My colleague in Turkey bought a lot of cattle and Bitcoin prior to Erdogan naming his son-in-law finance and treasury minister. When the lira collapsed, he was basically unaffected and was able to help those around him. Story 21. I have seen 3 coups in my lifetime. Once the latest one started, my girlfriend at the time and I decided to head out to the restaurant we always wanted to eat at but never had the patience to wait in line for 4 hours because it was popular. We were right. There was no line because everyone was glued to their televisions. I wish I had prepared better for what to do rather than go to that one restaurant. Story 22. Oh, that's right. That's a heavy one. I've actually thought about this a lot. If I could go back, I'd do a few things differently. First, cash. I cannot stress this enough. When things go sideways, automated teller machines either stop working or limit withdrawals. Having some physical money stashed, including different currencies, would have made life much easier. Also, maybe a USB drive with everything encrypted. Honestly, I wish I had built a stronger local network. When things get chaotic, you need people you can trust. It's not always about politics. Just someone who knows where to get medication or a safe place to stay if needed. It's happening, but I wish I had acted fast when I felt something was off. Story 23. Befriend military personnel from other countries during vacations. They will help you cross their borders. Story 24. Bought dollars. Installed solar power system or a diesel generator. Bought lots more canned food and dry rations. Story 25. I had to make a quick run to Walmart this morning. I thought about washing the car, but then remembered that it might rain later. I walked the dog and vacuumed. Story 26. I hope you are not in the United States and asking because of what is happening there currently. It is horrible, and I feel for everyone affected. Story 27. Honestly, this is terrifying to even think about. I cannot imagine having to sell everything and just leave. It makes you realize how fragile everything we take for granted really is. Story 28. Get an education and obtain citizenship in a normal country. I cannot think of any form of preparedness that would last for decades. A distant second option would be to have as many children as possible, in the hope that some of them might survive. I once heard this advice from an Austro-Hungarian woman who lived through fascism. Get as many guns as possible, along with plenty of ammunition. The more guns you have, the harder it is to disarm you. Legally owned firearms in the hands of the public help prevent fascism. Illegal firearms help to a lesser extent. They can mitigate the most extreme periods of violence. I witnessed and participated in the collapse of the Soviet Union and the rise of Vladimir Putin. Story 29. Doing some preparing, I see. I understand that the military parade yesterday was embarrassing in every conceivable way. The minute a Coinbase sponsorship appeared, it was clear to me that the government is doing the failed business equivalent of ripping the copper out of the walls. Story 30. When things go bad in the United States, it will go bad everywhere else. It has already started. Where are those in the United States going to go? Forget about how. Where? When things collapse for everyone, you may find that all of those in the United States are seen as the problem. Like what happened in Germany. Story 31. Venezuela is a good example. The warning signs were clear. They should have sold everything and fled sooner. Story 32. All of you who say you are getting ready to leave, what about your family? Your extended family? Can you leave them behind? Story 33. Okay, I'll bite. I was an American kid in Kenya during the 1982 attempted coup against a duly elected but then autocratic leader, Daniel Arap Moi. We had no warning at all. We woke up to machine gun fire and mortar shells in nearby neighborhoods. Our house was on the outskirts of Nairobi. There was an immediate 24-hour curfew for the first week as the army routed out traitors. The reason the coup failed is the army, at the last moment, refused to join the coup, leaving the Navy and university students to Moi's wrath. The country paid dearly over the next 15 or so years as Moi destroyed much of it, but I digress. I went out of the house 3 times in the next few weeks. The first time, during the 24-hour curfew, was because I was sick and had to get to a doctor. My parents sent me in the car with our driver so only one family member would be at risk if we were shot on the road. I was really sick, barely ambulatory. At the roundabout in Muthaiga, Andrew, our driver, commanded me to hold my passport through the window. I was barely lucid but looked up and saw 3 guns trained on our car. Around the roundabout were cars that had crashed when their drivers were shot. Luckily, we reached the doctor. I had septicemia, and we were able to get home soon after with a bag of pills. Yes, in third world countries at that time, you don't stay in the hospital for something that's serious. The second outing was about a week after the attempted coup, during the 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. curfew. My stepfather wanted to see what was going on, so we got in the car for a short drive. Fuel was precious. Police were checking everyone's ID at the roundabouts, and as we finally came first in line to go, soldiers opened fire on a car which crashed on the far side of the roundabout. We were all on the floor of the car, so I didn't watch it. We were waved through. It was very tense and unpredictable. The third time was to make sure my stepsister was okay. The university students were still uprising, and about 2 or 3 buses of them passed her house on a main street going into the heart of Nairobi. There was an intense amount of gunfire, and shortly after, trucks came back up that road carrying students' bodies. I have to edit my post here as I think the last 2 events both happened on the second outing after the coup. I was still ill and young, so it's muddy. Sorry. What I and we all learned then, have a coup cupboard. My kids here in the United States used to laugh at me for that, but it sure came in handy for the pandemic. Have a ham radio, which is less effective now since this was before the internet and cell phones, and a shortwave radio to get international news. Have medicines on hand. Get a gas tank for cars and generators. Have space for friends who come to dinner to stay for the night or a few days. We had already built our immediate response community. If we heard a burglar alarm at night, it was like a siren since there were no telephone response-style alarms. We all got into our cars and rushed to the sound. One never called the police unless you wanted to be shaken down. In fact, the only place to buy beer after hours was at the local police station. Have dogs. It doesn't matter what size. All you need are their ears. They're the first alarm. I doubt much of this is useful now, but that's how we survived. Guns were and remain highly regulated there. We had a 12-gauge shotgun, but we're only one of the few houses to have a gun at all. So we always responded to house sirens. I still have a long-range radio and am considering a ham radio again. I still have a coup cupboard. I still stockpile medicine and first aid supplies. I still have dogs. I'm not on the land I prepared for this situation due to divorce, and my ex-husband has no idea how it can go south. But there we are. Story 34. Well, the people should have stopped a convicted felon and traitor to his country from running for president. They might as well have voted Charles Manson into office. Story 35. I live in a collapsed democracy right now, even though no one seems to realize it yet. I wish I had moved my wife and children to another country when it was easier. It is still happening, but it is much harder now. Story 36. Hopelessly stuck here, aging, no jobs, no one hiring, business failed, no property, not a technology engineer or science, technology, engineering, and mathematics professional. Well, reading all these experiences and what it took, none of the escapees seemed to be from the stuck class. If I wasn't thinking of giving up before, I definitely am now. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.